In the headlines this hour, with her prime minister nominee named, political focus is now on President Park Geun-hye's cabinet and top office shakeups widely expected this week. Thousands of Korean police and prosecutors raid a religious compound for a second time on Wednesday in their futile search for a businessman/cult leader linked to the April ferry disaster. And Korea's job growth slows for the third straight month in May. The finance ministry attributes the slowdown to the April ferry disaster. Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. President Park Geun-hye's nomination of a new prime minister on Tuesday was the first domino in an imminent reshuffle of her cabinet as well as the presidential office. Political watchers believe a series of nominations and appointments will be made soon, even before this week is up. Our presidential office correspondent Choi Yoo-sun has more.
Contrary to earlier predictions, President Park is expected to carry out reshuffles of her cabinet and the presidential office before departing for Central Asia next Monday. That seems to be the consensus, as the swift move would be made to avoid a further delay in government restructuring and public service reforms, which the president promised in the aftermath of April's ferry disaster. On Wednesday, her spokesperson Min Kyung-wook said there was a possibility that changes could take place this week. Under normal circumstances, the president would wait for the prime minister nominee to be confirmed by the National Assembly at the end of this month or the start of next before making such a wide-scale change. But since the president cannot afford to waste any more time, her nominee Moon Chang-guk will likely take part in the process of choosing new cabinet ministers, while current Prime Minister Chung Hong-won would make the official recommendations. The speculation is that the nation's finance minister, who also acts as the deputy prime minister, will likely be replaced by the president's close aide and former ruling party floor leader Choi Kyung-hwan. Another potential candidate is current Presidential Economic Affairs Secretary Cho Won-dong. The ministers of Security and Education, both of whom came under fire for inconsiderate behavior after the ferry accident, may get the axe. It's speculated that someone from academia could take on the role of education minister, who will also sit as the second deputy prime minister. A number of President Park's senior secretaries, including ones in charge of the economy, culture, and political affairs, may either be named into the cabinet or given a different post. Meanwhile, her chief of staff and senior secretary for state planning are widely expected to stay put for now. Choi Yoo-sun, ARIRANG News.
The owner of the Seoul-ho ferry that sank back in April, killing hundreds of people, is still on the run. And on this Wednesday morning, thousands of police raided his religious compound for a second time, but didn't exactly find all they were looking for. Yoo Di-an tells us more.
Some 6,000 police have raided a religious compound in Anseong, south of Seoul, to arrest two women suspected of helping the fugitive de facto owner of the Seoul ferry, Yoo Byung-eun, evade authorities. They have yet to find the two women, but they did arrest other church followers suspected of playing a key role in aiding and abetting the fugitive ferry owner. Yoo is a founding member of the Salvation Sect religious group, which is believed to have acted as the control tower for his escape. The massive operation comes less than 24 hours after President Park Geun-hye lashed out against the joint investigation team for taking too long to find Yoo.
지금까지의 검거 방식을 재점검하고 다른 추가적인 방법은 없는지 모든 수단과 방법을 검토해서 반드시 법의 심판을 받도록 해야 할 것입니다.
The Seoul ferry owner has not been spotted in public since the tragic disaster occurred in April. Prosecutors say he has previously attempted to smuggle himself out of the country by offering to pay brokers a whopping 10 billion won, or roughly $10 million. Hours after President Park's comments a day earlier, prosecutors held an emergency meeting with police, military, and government officials and decided to have the Navy watch over the coast surrounding Korea to prevent the fugitive from fleeing the country. This is the first time that the Navy has been called on to take part in an operation designed specifically to prevent someone from being smuggled out of the nation. Yoo Di-an, ARIRANG News.
And staying with this story, the captain and surviving crew members of the ill-fated ferry have angered many by being the first ones to escape the ferry while leaving behind hundreds of others in the sinking vessel. Now, with their trial underway, our Connie Kim takes a look at the challenging task ahead for the prosecution in their efforts to bring them to justice.
The biggest issue in the trial is whether 4 senior crew members, including the captain, will be found guilty of murder by willful negligence for abandoning the ferry prematurely and leaving hundreds of passengers to die. On the first day of the trial, state prosecutors accused the 4 of killing some 300 passengers by failing to make every effort to rescue them. Apart from the murder charge, the 4 were also charged with negligence that led to the sinking of the vessel and caused great casualty. The 11 other crew members were similarly charged. The senior crew members argued it was the Coast Guard's responsibility to rescue passengers. Captain Lee Jun-suk's lawyer asserted that it was unjust to hold Lee responsible for what he could not do when he had taken steps to protect the vessel while he awaited the arrival of the Coast Guard. A court official quoted the captain as saying that he asked passengers to get off the ferry before he abandoned the vessel himself. Another lawyer defending the first mate said crew members requested emergency help from the Coast Guard and thought it would be best to evacuate passengers when rescue experts arrived. For the murder charges to be upheld, prosecutors will need to overcome a number of challenges. They need to prove the crew members did not make efforts to rescue passengers even though they knew those on board would die. The prosecution also needs to prove the direct link between the acts of the crew and the death of the passengers. The next session is scheduled for next Tuesday, and the verdict is expected no later than November. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
It's been a week since the opening of this month's extraordinary parliamentary session with no results to speak of just yet. The ruling Saenuri Party's floor leader has proposed a set of measures to set government reforms in motion. Kim Young-gil has more.
Addressing the full assembly and members of President Park Geun-hye's cabinet on Wednesday, ruling Saenuri Party floor leader Lee Won-gu said his party will be at the forefront of reforming the government and party politics.
I propose the establishment of 3 special committees for reform. Committees to reform politics, to reform the government, and to take care of the people's livelihoods. These committees will provide a master plan to reform our country.
Earlier this week, rival party floor leaders held their first weekly meeting and shared the common view that the government should spur efforts to restructure the nation's safety management system. Floor leader Lee also proposed forming a joint consultative body between the Saenuri Party and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy.
The consultative body would discuss all agenda items ranging from public livelihood bills to sending special envoys to North Korea.
If the joint consultative body is launched, lawmakers expect it to speed up initiatives to aid parliamentary operations. Currently in the spotlight is the Green Light Law, which aims to make it easier for bills to be voted on. Any bill that party floor leaders and the Assembly Speaker designate as a green light bill could be sent straight for a vote on the Assembly floor. On Thursday, the floor leader of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, Park Young-sun, will deliver a keynote speech at the plenary session. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
Nuclear negotiators from South Korea and China met in Beijing on Tuesday to discuss the conditions for restarting the 6-party nuclear talks. No surprise agreements were reached so far, but Seoul did show some flexibility in re-engaging through dialogue. Hwang Sung-hee tells us more.
As Chinese President Xi Jinping readies for his visit to South Korea next month, Seoul's chief nuclear envoy Hwang Jung-guk and his Chinese counterpart Woo Da-wei met Tuesday in Beijing to discuss a resumption of the long-stalled 6-party nuclear talks. Speaking to reporters on the condition of anonymity, a high-ranking South Korean official said preventing further development of Pyongyang's nuclear capacity is the most important step for now. The official added a complete denuclearization of North Korea through dialogue is the shared goal of Seoul, Washington, and Beijing. He said it is up to North Korea to demonstrate that it is sincere about denuclearization if it wants to return to the six-party talks, but maintained some flexibility by saying there are several ways to show its sincerity. The multilateral negotiations aimed at ending Pyongyang's nuclear program involves the two Koreas, the United States, China, Japan, and Russia, but has been at a standstill for more than 5 years. The South Korean official left open the possibility of a new form of nuclear talks, but remained cautious by saying it is difficult even for the five parties to meet. The diplomatic efforts to reignite the nuclear talks come ahead of President Xi's first official visit to South Korea in late June or early July. Experts say Seoul should make use of the Chinese leader's upcoming visit as an opportunity to outline what it wants from Pyongyang in exchange for restarting dialogue. Hwang Sang-hee, ARIRANG News.
President Park has called on overseas members of her Unification Advisory Council to spur international efforts to improve the livelihoods of North Koreans. This, she said, would help the two Koreas take a step closer to unification. At a meeting with hundreds of advisors, the South Korean president referred to a three-point proposal she made to Pyongyang during a trip to Germany back in March. In it, she suggested the two Koreas first resolve North Korea's humanitarian issues, jointly build infrastructure, and expand social as well as cultural exchanges to better prepare for a unified Korea. President Park then vowed to continue persuading North Korea to give up its nuclear arms to bring peace and freedom to the Korean Peninsula.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8, every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. The ferry tragedy in April continues to weigh on the Korean economy, slowing down the pace of its recovery. This time, it's the nation's job figures that have taken a hit. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
The Korean economy added 410,000 jobs in May from a year ago, bringing the number of employed in the nation to almost 26 million. But that marks 3 straight months of slowing job growth and the lowest gain since last July. Statistics Korea says slumping private consumption due to the deadly ferry disaster in April resulted in the lower growth in employment last month. It's no surprise then that the nation's service industry, which includes the retail, lodging, and restaurant sectors, added only around 320,000 jobs in May from a year earlier, far lower than more than 500,000 created in the previous month. Job creation in the leisure activities sector even dropped by 17,000. The statistics agency said earlier that service sector production had dropped 1% from the previous month, while retail sales were down more than 1.5%. That, the agency said, is a reflection of the lackluster domestic demand brought on by the disaster. While the government has cautioned that slowing consumer spending caused by the ferry tragedy could hurt the nation's economic recovery, the finance ministry says it's not considering an extra budget to further stimulate the economy. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
The title of fastest growing mobile market in the world belongs to the Asia-Pacific region. That's according to a report by Group Special Mobile Association. Out of 3.4 billion mobile subscribers around the world, it says half live in the Asia-Pacific, and the future appears to hold more of the same. With 5.5% annual growth expected in that region, the total number of subscribers is expected to grow to 2.4 billion by the year 2020. While the report says that just 3% of mobile phone users are currently on a 4G network, that number is likely to rise to 28% by 2020. Korea was named as the country with the most advanced 4G market and the only country to be fully covered by the long-term evolution network. Let the countdown begin. 100 days from today, the northwestern port city of Incheon will host the 2014 Asian Games. Kwon So-ah reports on the preparations and what we can expect from the event.
Incheon, a port city in northwestern Korea that boasts the nation's third largest population, is gearing up to host the 17th Asian Games this fall.
I'm very excited since the events take place in my neighborhood.
I look forward to the games, as I have never watched such a big event up close.
The Asian Games first came to Korea in 1986 when they were hosted in Seoul and then again in Busan in 2002. Incheon was selected as the third Korean host city 7 years ago. Now, with 100 days to go before the big event, how prepared is the city? The city's new landmark Incheon Asiad Main Stadium was completed last month. 16 of the 49 stadiums that will be used for the games are newly constructed, while the rest have been remodeled. The city spent roughly $2.2 billion preparing for the games.
As an Incheon citizen, I do have my worries. I think it was too much of a financial burden for the city to build new stadiums.
Hosting such a high-profile event comes with risks, but the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy says the Incheon Games have the potential to generate an economic impact worth $1.3 billion and could create 270,000 new jobs.
Although we have financial difficulties, when the Incheon Asian Games are held successfully, Incheon will not only become a hub in Northeast Asia, but will grow into a global city.
The Incheon Asian Games Organizing Committee is trying to make this year's event the most economical, efficient, and eco-friendly one yet, an event that will serve as a role model for developing nations in Asia.
Diversity shines here is the slogan for the 2014 Incheon Asian Games. The city of Incheon says it will do its best to display the diversity of Asia and help Asia reach its development potential during the event. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
Iraq's prime minister has asked parliament to declare a state of emergency after Islamist militants took control of the country's second largest city. For more on this story and others, Paul is joining us from the news center. Paul, the Iraqi security forces have all but abandoned the city of Mosul at this point. Where does that leave the civilians who are trapped in this growing conflict?
Well, the Sunni militant group has forced hundreds of thousands of people out of their homes, with new estimates showing that as many as 500,000 residents have fled the city. It signifies another victory for the al-Qaeda splinter group, prompting concerns by the international community that the shift in power may threaten the entire region. Our Connie Lee has more.
The second largest city in Iraq, Mosul, turned into a battlefield on Tuesday and is now under the control of armed Islamist fighters. The group, an offshoot of al-Qaeda, is called the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, otherwise known as ISIL. Buildings were set ablaze and cars were destroyed in the fighting.
Planes and command positions, all of them have fallen, in addition to weapons caches. Also, prisons were stormed and criminals have been set free. What happened was a catastrophe by any measure.
Up to 500,000 people, including civilians and Iraqi troops, fled the city as the Sunni rebels took charge. The Iraqi government has declared a state of emergency and announced that it would arm its citizens to fight the rebels. The latest violence has also raised alarms in neighboring countries.
I have always been afraid of going to Mosul. After this incident, I would never set foot there. We are really uneasy, and we are really scared of these developments.
Mosul is the second city to be captured by the rebels. The first was the city of Fallujah earlier this year, where fighters have taken control of the governor's headquarters, TV stations, and prisons. The U.S. has called the situation in Mosul extremely serious and said the Islamist group is a threat to the entire region. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon also said he was gravely concerned about the events in Iraq. According to the UN, sectarian violence just last month in Iraq killed nearly 800 people. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
And turning now to Tokyo, where the Japanese government has launched a protest against China's move to register the Nanjing massacre with the United Nations Heritage List. Japan says it doesn't deny that the brutal wartime massacre happened, but that Beijing has exaggerated the death toll in its UNESCO report. Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshida Suga demanded on Wednesday that China remove its application for the Nanjing massacre and UNESCO's Memory of the World program. He says he regrets China is using the United Nations cultural body as a political playing field. In response, the Chinese government said there was a need to remember history, cherish peace, and avert similar atrocities from happening again.
We are of the opinion that we cannot deny that the Imperial Japanese Army pillaged the city, which included non-combatants, after entering Nanjing. But there are many arguments concerning the numbers involved, and the Japanese government has stated that it is difficult to confirm the numbers.
Japanese troops battling Chinese forces captured Nanjing in late 1937. China says in the weeks that followed, Japanese troops killed some 300,000 people. A post-war Allied tribunal, however, put the death toll at around 142,000. And Hyundai Motor Company's first hydrogen fuel cell car has debuted in the U.S. state of California for the very first time. State energy and air quality officials have hailed the eco-friendly vehicle for its zero emissions, as vehicle pollution accounts for a third of California's greenhouse gas emissions. The fuel cell Tucson model can travel up to 400 kilometers on a single fill-up. The engine has no moving parts, and its only byproducts are heat and water vapor. However, there's only 9 refueling stations in the entire state. It marks the first commercial debut of Hyundai's hydrogen fuel cell vehicles in the United States. But company officials say cars are still not yet available for sale to the public.
This car is a real game changer. We'd like to call it the next generation EV. And what I mean by that is with conventional battery electric EVs, there's always an issue of recharge time. There's always a challenge in terms of range. There's always a challenge in terms of scaling the vehicle up to vehicles Americans like, SUVs and bigger vehicles.
Independent industry analysts were cautious about the announcement. They say the relatively high cost of the technology and extremely low number of hydrogen refueling stations would limit the market for such vehicles in the near future. That being said, California aims to have 1.5 million zero-emission vehicles on its roads by 2025. And finally, a group of dancers from Cuba's National Ballet Company have defected to the U.S. The 6 dancers who are now in Miami, Florida, have been speaking out for the first time since defecting from the communist nation. And the consensus is that there's just a lack of opportunities for them back in their home country. It's the second major defection of Cuban ballet dancers in the U.S. in little more than 12 months. Cuba is one of the world's top producers of ballet talent, but dancers are restricted for working abroad and receiving high-paying salaries.
I was thinking of the future above all, how it would be to live here. This is a country of many opportunities, which isn't how it is in Cuba. No, just thinking about the future and helping my family. That is the most important.
Cuba provides free training to thousands of young dancers around the country from the age of 9, but even their elite dancers earn modest salaries of only $10 to $30 per month. And that wraps up our look at international stories around the world. I'll be back with more updates in just about 2 hours.
Now let's let's get a check on the weather with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, talk about abnormal weather conditions. We're getting whirlwinds to hail. What's going on?
Teddy, all these random weather conditions, that is due to the unstable atmosphere. Plus, the nation continues to be at the edge of a high pressure front from the East Sea. So all of this is leading to stormy conditions here in the capital and also in some parts of the inland regions. And it looks like this precipitation has brought down temperatures, so it may feel chilly outside. So an umbrella and a light cardigan is a must when heading outdoors. For those of you wondering, this round of showers will gradually come to an end later tonight, but will resume tomorrow morning, and we're looking at another 5 to 40 millimeters in most parts of the country tomorrow. Taking a closer look at tomorrow's readings, Seoul tops out at 27 degrees, while Daegu and Gwangju hit the mid-20s. On to other places, Jeju peaks at 23 degrees, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang reach 18 and 19. And that's all for me at this hour, but I'll be back with more after 10.
Thank you, Bo-kyung. And that does it for this edition of ARIRANG News at 8. Thanks for watching, and I will see you back here at 10 p.m. Korea time.